The last 3 years I taught myself French, Spanish and Brazilian Portuguese. In this video I want to answer the question which of these languages is the hardest to learn for English or Germanic language natives. So people who speak German, Dutch, Danish, etc. I will compare these three languages in terms of pronunciation and different aspects of grammar. Let's do it! I created a nice mirror board for us so we can compare French, which will always be on the left, Spanish in the middle and Brazilian Portuguese to the right. We'll start with pronunciation. And after every, let's say, chapter, I will give points. So at the end, we can add up all these points and see which one should be the most difficult to learn. Okay, let's start with French. So, what's the challenge here? French has many nasal sounds, which is a big challenge for Germanic English natives because we don't have them. It's just a different thing that your mouth and your nose has to do to create a sound and sound well enough, because in French you have to, or you should, produce these sounds as well as possible, otherwise it will just sound weird and you will not be understood actually. So the word français includes the nasal sound un, français, or un chapeau. You don't say un, you don't say un, you say un chapeau. Then we have silent sounds like the H in hôtel. You don't say hotel, you say hôtel. When French people learn German, it's sometimes funny because they would say und, not Hund, the word for dog, but they say und. Always cracks me up. Okay, then we have silent sounds. The word grand means big, the masculine form for the adjective big in French. You don't hear the D, you say grand. Again, nasal sound. But when the adjective becomes feminine, you will add an E and then you will hear the D. Okay, now you say grande, grand and grande. So you have to know when to pronounce which letters. Also a challenge. Next thing, the written language differs greatly from spoken language in French. This is because many words that are written differently are pronounced the same. So you have to know what people are talking about. You have to get the context immediately, otherwise you will not know who is addressed, okay? So if we look at the French verb aimer, which is to like, the first person singular, I like, is j'aime. But if we say you like, tu aimes, pronounced the same, j'aime, and aime, tu aimes, although we have an S, pronounced the same. Or they like, ils aiment. Here again, different writing, but you still pronounce it the same way, okay? This is a challenge. You have to know how to pronounce it, or when you hear it, you have to watch out for the pronouns like il, tu, je. Again, il. If it's the single word, you say il, but due to the liaison, which is the next topic, you will pronounce it ils aiment. Then you hear the S, okay? And liaison is this, let's say, rule that you will pronounce the last consonant if the word after begins with a vowel, but not for every word, for specific words. You will have this for pronouns, for example. Ils aiment or mes amis. Mes, which is mine or my in the plural. You will not hear the S, you say mes, but if it's followed by a noun who begins with a vowel, then you say mes amis. Difficult. Okay, let's hop over to Spanish. Spanish has this particular R sound, the rolling R, okay? You say perro, ronda, whatever. This can be a challenge for some people, especially because in English, generally, you know, when you are from America, then you don't use the R. In some places of the UK, the R is rolled as well. Or in Germany, there is a tiny place in the north, North Friesland, people roll the R, yeah, but generally we don't. So this can be a challenge. And also we'll have silent vowels or silent letters. So we don't pronounce the H in the beginning. You say hombre, not hombre, same as French. But other than that, the Spanish pronunciation is very straightforward, okay? Most of the letters have a specific and fixed pronunciation, and you just pronounce it as you would read in German or English. So this word would be temperamento. One interesting thing though, the C is pretty much like in English. So the pronunciation of the C depends on the vowel that comes after. So this word, here you say centro, but this is con. Cada, okay? If it's followed by an O or an A, the C becomes a K. But if it's followed by a E or I, so ciudad becomes a C. At least in South America. In mainland Spain, if the C is followed by an I or an E, it will be more pronounced like the TH in English. So centro, ciudad, but depends on the accent you're learning. Same in English, right? We say concert, but we say city. That's pretty interesting. That's something I learned just recently, actually. Okay. Brazilian Portuguese. So here as well, like in French, we have nasal sounds. So we say bom dia or ação. And we have different letters, you know, you have the A with a little wave on top or the C with a little tail. If you got a C with a little tail, this means that it's always pronounced se, no matter if it's followed by an O or an A. That's why this is ação. If this would be a normal C, it would be pronounced acão. So now this one was my personal challenge, or the biggest challenge for me, the R in Brazilian Portuguese. Holy shit. The R is pronounced differently depending on the position in the word, okay? So if the R is in the beginning, you would say rato. It's like an H, like a very soft rato. But if the R is in the beginning of the syllable after a consonant, then it will be r, Cristo, Cristo, and rato. If the R is at the end of a syllable, then it will be like conversar, conversar. At least in particular places, more in the north, okay? Another challenge, in Brazilian Portuguese, you have different accents, and the R is one of those things that will change. If you go more to the south, you would say conversar, r, then you would roll more. In the Sao Paulo region, you would say conversar, like the American R, conversar. And in the north, it is conversar, difficult, okay? And then, if you have a word with R as the last letter, and the word after it begins with a vowel, then you will also roll it, okay? So this word alone would be professor, but in the sentence, you would read o que professor aprende na faculdade. Professor aprende. This is something that you have to learn so the sentences flow better. And again, let me give you an example. This one, which translates to please, can I have this please, will be different in all three sotaques, which are the accents, at least the main ones, okay? So in the north, you would say por favor. In the Sao Paulo, maybe even Rio de Janeiro region, you would say por favor. But in the south, you would say por favor. Difficult, okay? So you have to decide on which accent you want to learn, actually. I'm learning the northern Belém, Salvador. Is it Salvador? Fortaleza, Belém region, like the region Pará. And there you'd say conversar. So, next thing, the D and the G can be a challenge in Portuguese. Because if the D is followed by an A or whatever, or B in the beginning or in the middle of the word, then it's a D. So, humanidade, the da. But if it is at the end, followed by an E or an I, it becomes G. So you say humanidade. Or when you say you're welcome, you say G, de nada. Or here the D is tudo. And the T, if the T is followed by an I, it will always become a chi. Tijolo. Or the famous singer, you will pronounce him Tim Maia. But if the T is followed by an A or whatever other vowel, then it's a T, tudo. Let's give points. In my opinion, and based on my experiences, French was the trickiest one, okay? Because we have nasal sounds, the silent letters, you have to always know when to pronounce the last consonant, yes or no, like grand, grande. And many words are written differently but pronounced the same. Different. And we have the liaison, which is something the others don't have. So French gets 3 points. As you see, the language with the most points will be the most difficult, okay? As an explanation. Then I would say Brazilian Portuguese, 2 points, because it also contains nasal sounds which are not existent in English. We have more letters, like the C with the tail, the A with the ch accent and everything. We also have accents in the others, don't get me wrong, but here we have more. Then the R is completely different depending on where it is positioned in the language. We have different accents, you have to decide on one. The D and the T are changing a pronunciation depending on certain things. For me, Brazilian Portuguese was still a little easier than French, because French has more things, but definitely more difficult than Spanish. That's why Spanish is the easiest for me in terms of pronunciation. The only challenge really is the R. If you manage to roll the R, then Spanish is not a challenge. Then you can read it off the bat. Someone, an English native, who has never learned either of those languages will most likely have the easiest time reading a Spanish text and trying to pronounce it than he would with a French or Portuguese. I would bet that someone who has never learned any of these languages will not be able to read a Brazilian or French text well enough so someone could understand. Spanish, yes. Spanish is possible. Chapter 2, let's talk about prepositions. And we start again with French. The French language uses around 50 to 60 prepositions. The classic ones are à, to, at in English, de, which is from, of, pour, for, avec, with, and chez, which you would use when you want to say that you are at a friend's house or that you work at this or that company. Then French has many compound prepositions, okay? So they are fixed and always need to be used in this way, like à côté de, which is beside, au lieu de, instead of, or en face de. Okay, je suis en face de ce bâtiment. I'm facing the building. Another thing that is usually a challenge for English speakers is that this language requires specific prepositions with certain verbs, even though they're not required in English. So in French, you would say, j'ai besoin de ton aide. As in English, you just say, I need your help. You don't say, I need of your help, or I need at your help, whatever. But in French, you will have to use a preposition here. And the last thing that was a big challenge for me personally, or the biggest when it comes to prepositions, is that most verbs demand either a or de as a preposition after it. Je commence à faire ça. I begin to do this or that. And this is not intuitive. You have to learn it, okay? It's so annoying. And I hate these static, dry grammar exercises, you know? But you have to memorize and just use them as many times as possible to get in your head when to use de or a as a preposition after certain verbs. Annoying. Spanish has only 25 to 30 prepositions, okay? So less than French. This makes it already way easier. We're talking half. But you will have more or less the same ones. We have a, which is to add. We have de, from, of. Now, the biggest difference here, in French we have one preposition that translates to for, pour. But in Spanish we have por and para, okay? And these are very distinct and need to be differentiated because they will have completely different meanings. I'll get to that in a second. And con, which is with. So you also have compound prepositions like delante de, in front of, al lado de, next to, or en lugar de. Okay, so there's no difference to French. The only difference is that we have less. Also here we have verbs that require a very specific preposition. Like when you say I'm thinking about you, you will always use en. estoy pensando en ti. Or when you want to say everything depends on you, we say todo depende de ti. And I'm dreaming of a better future. Sueño con un futuro mejor. Okay, so soñar, dreaming, will always require the preposition con. As I said, in my opinion, the greatest challenge in Spanish prepositions is the distinction between por and para. Since in English we only have one, we say for everything. But in Spanish you have to know what means what. And just to give you an idea, para is used for destination. You know, when you say voy para Madrid, go to Madrid. Or when you want to talk about a recipient, you know, I give this to you, doy para ti. The meaning will change depending on which one you use, so you have to know which one is right for the message you want to convey. So if I say lo hice para ti, then it means I did this for you in a way that it was a favor from me to you as the recipient, you know, like I give you something. But if you say lo hice por ti, then it means I did this because of you, as you are the reason I did it. Okay, so when you use por, it is as a means of, when we talk about reason or cause. When you want to say I'm walking through the park, you say camino por el parque. Or when we're talking about exchange, you know, I bought this for 10 euros, lo compré por 10 euros, those things. Again, this has to be memorized, okay? But if we compare these already, Spanish is still easier, okay? We use fewer prepositions and we don't have so many non-intuitive cases that are unpredictable. All right, lastly, let's talk about Brazilian Portuguese. This is pretty straightforward, actually. In Brazilian Portuguese, we also have 25 to 30 prepositions, like in Spanish, and they're almost the same. We have a, de, por, para, com. The rest is almost identical to Spanish, which makes it very, very easy, okay? And even por y para are almost used in the same way. They have the same meaning in like 99% of the cases, but maybe you would use para more often in Brazilian Portuguese than in Spanish, okay? In Spanish, when you want to say go to the beach, you would say voy a la playa. But in Portuguese, you would say vou pra praia. But it would still be right to say the other way around. You know, in Spanish, you can also say voy para la playa. As in Brazilian, you could also say vou a praia. Okay. The biggest difference, though, is the contraction of prepositions, which you don't have in Spanish. M-O in one sentence, then it becomes no, okay? Estou no carro, in the. M is the in English, and U is the article, the masculine article. In English, we have only the, so this is easy, but in Spanish, in all three languages, we have two, you know, in Brazilian Portuguese, u, a, masculine, feminine, ella in Spanish, le, la in French. So, M, U becomes no, M-A would be na, okay? Estou no carro, estou na casa. Or para and U becomes pro in a more informal context, so you say viajar para o Brasil, or viajar pro Brasil. And por and O becomes pelo, okay? So you say fazer uma caminhada pelo parque. I take a walk through the park. Another thing that makes Brazilian Portuguese a little easier than Spanish is the use of prepositions with objects, okay? When we have direct object in Spanish, you always have to use the preposition a. So if I want to invite Lucas, I say convido a Lucas. Same with indirect objects, okay? When I want to give Lucas a present, then I would say le doy un regalo a Lucas. But in Brazilian Portuguese, you don't have to use it in a direct object sentence, okay? You just say convido Lucas. The rules for indirect objects is also a little bit more straightforward, okay? Here you would usually use para in spoken and formal language. So you would say dou presente para ele. That's way more straightforward and easy. And I gotta say, generally, Brazilian Portuguese feels more intuitive to me when it comes to prepositions, but I gotta say Brazilian Portuguese is the last language I learned, so I'm already kind of used to the idea of how prepositions are used in these Latin languages. That's why I don't know if that counts, but I would say it's pretty clear that French is the most complicated here due to the sheer number of prepositions and the not intuitive part. So French is 3. Then I gotta say Brazilian Portuguese feels a little bit more straightforward, but there's kind of more rules or more things that you have to consider, like the contraction of the prepositions. So I gotta say, generally speaking, Brazilian Portuguese will be a little bit more difficult than Spanish. But this is my subjective thought. I'm really not sure here if Spanish is easier than Brazilian Portuguese. So they are more or less on the same page, okay? Difficult. But I'd say we leave it like this, as I'm trying to be as objective as possible. Let's talk about tenses. This one's gonna be intense, and that's not even a joke. All right, French. When we want to talk about present actions, we just use the le présent, nothing special here, like in English. When we want to talk about past actions, then we use one of 3 tenses. Note here, there is more than these, okay? There is way more tenses and forms than the ones listed, but they're not widely used. So you also have the passé simple, which you will find more in literature, okay, in official documents and stuff, but you don't need it when you want to learn spoken French. You will find it in the book Le Petit Prince, for example, which is one of the most famous French books ever, but if you just want to speak and not write books, you will not need it, okay? But if we want to talk about general past actions, we use the imparfait. So in English, this is the simple past, I ate that. In French is je mangeais ça. Okay? Same idea, used the same way. The passé composé and plus que parfait are like the present perfect and past perfect. So in English we say I have done that. In French, j'ai fait ça. I have done, I, et, have, fait, done. No, even the word, the syntax is the same. The plus que parfait, or the past perfect, would be I had done that. No, in French you go j'avais fait ça. So again, same idea. When we want to talk about the future, here comes the first difference now. In English, we just go I will do it. You know, you just add the will. I will eat it, I will do it, I will see it. But in French, we have the conjugate verb, okay? There's new forms to learn, so a little bit more, but the idea of how to use it is the same. So you would say, je mangerai ça. I will eat it, okay? Tu mangeras. You will eat. Il mangera. He will eat, okay? Same idea, but just more to memorize. But then we have something that's completely the same, the going to future. I'm going to do that. In French, use aller, which is the verb for going, like je vais faire ça. Same idea. I going do that. Same thing here. So that's easy. Now comes the challenge, the subjonctif présent. This is a form that does not exist in English. There's something kind of similar in German, der Konjunktiv, but it's not used in the same way, so it's still a challenge. You have the subjunctive in the present and in the past form, and this mood is very important to express wishes, desires, doubts, uncertainties, emotions, necessity, and possibility. You have to learn this to sound native. If you don't use it, people will understand you, but it will sound weird, okay? So this is something you have to learn. I will talk a little bit more about this when we get to Spanish. Then we have the conditionnel and the conditionnel passé, two forms. So in English, when we want to express certainty, you say, I can do it. But when you want to express possibility, you say, I could do it. Or, I will do it. Sure, I do it. And possibility or uncertainties, I would. I would do it if, condition. In French, the idea is the same, but in French, you have to conjugate the verbs again. I mean, in English, I could eat it, I would build it, you just add would or could. But in French, you have to conjugate the verbs. So the I want becomes je voudrais. And this is widely used and important, okay? One more thing to memorize and to practice. The conditionnel passé is used for impossible condition clauses only, like if clauses with impossible condition. So that's easy to know when to use, but still another thing to learn. And the imperative, also another thing where the form of the verb changes. In English, you just use the verb, eat it, do it, watch out. But in French, you have to learn forms. So that's a little annoying, but again, the idea is the same. You just have to learn a little bit more. So it's a challenge. In Spanish, we have also one present tense. That's easy. But now you see we have 4 tenses to talk about the past. The pretérito perfecto simple, the perfecto compuesto, which is like our perfect tense, the imperfecto, which is like the imparfait, and the pluscuamperfecto, which is like the past perfect. Thing is here now that the distinction between the perfecto simple and the imperfecto is a challenge. It is my personal challenge still sometimes, I gotta admit, but also for Spanish learners. Important thing to note here, the perfecto compuesto is mainly used in mainland Spain, not so much in South America. So it depends on which language you want to learn. If you're American, you will probably learn Mexican or Argentinian or Colombian Spanish, then this might not be as important to you. But if you're European and you want to learn the European Spanish, then you will have to use this. Let's dive into the details, because I said the perfecto and the imperfecto is the most challenging to distinct. So what do we express here? The perfecto is used to talk about past events that are completed in the past, like when someone asks, hey, do you want to eat with us? You say, no, gracias, ya comí. I already ate, I ate. For example, you're standing at the fridge or you're on the couch, someone's in the fridge looking inside and be like, oh, where's the pizza, And then you're still chewing on the last bit of cheese, look into the fridge ashamed and be like, oh, I ate it, I've eaten it. Then you would rather say, ya he comido. Lo he comido, or ya he comido. Then you would use a different form because it has an effect to the present. So perfecto compuesto is for completed events that happened in the past but have an effect on the present. Like in this very moment, you say, oh, I've eaten. And the imperfecto is for ongoing actions in the past, okay? So when you want to talk about habits, like when I was a child, I used to swim every day, okay? Cuando era niño, nadaba cada día. Okay, when I was a child, I swam every day. We just say swam in English, but in Spanish we would use the imperfecto because we're talking about past habits. The thing is, there's some expressions, specific ones that can be memorized. So when we talk about when I was a child sentences, you will always use the imperfecto. You say era. You will not say cuando fui niño, which would be the perfecto tense. You don't do that. Never. And also another rule of thumb when we talk about or use verbs like saber, which is to know, ser and estar, which are to be, or querer, which is to want. They are used in imperfecto in most cases, not all, but most. So this makes it a little easier. When you want to say, hey, have you ever been to the States? When you're asked and you say, yeah, I went last year, then you would say, fui el año pasado. okay, then fui will be perfecto tense and not imperfecto, because it's not a habit. You don't say, no, I went there consecutively multiple times. I went there once and I come back and I'm there, not there anymore. Then you would use the perfecto. There's a lot more to say about all this, okay? I could make an hour video on the differences between all those tenses. And if you would like that, if you're learning Spanish, French, or Portuguese, and you're struggling with these, put it in the comments and then I might make a video about it, okay? But now I'm just trying to give you a nice overview. In English or French, when we talk about general perfect past actions, we just use the imparfait, but in Spanish you will either have to use the perfecto simple or the imperfecto. So it is a challenge sometimes to know which one to use when. That's number one. The next challenge, and this one is the greatest for me and also the greatest challenge when people learn Spanish, is the use of the subjuntivo. Okay, same as in French, but we have one more mode. Okay, we have also the pretérito imperfecto. I mean, we also have it in French, but in French it's not used, so that's why it's in brackets. In Spanish, it is used for impossible condition tenses or sentences as well, but generally the main subjuntivo is in the present form. The idea is the same as in French when we talk about uncertainty, doubt, feelings, and that stuff, but the verbs that demand or require the subjuntivo will differ, and there is just more things that will demand it, and that's a hustle to learn. For example, in French, the word espérer will not demand the subjuntivo, but in Spanish, esperar, which is the same, it means to hope or to wait, will do. So in French, we say, j'espère que tu vas bien. I hope that you're all right. You are all right. In Spanish, you say, espero que tu vaya bien. Espero que tu vaya bien. Again, if you don't use it, people will understand, but it sounds weird, okay? And sometimes it's even crucial for the meaning of the sentence. It will differ if you say tu va or tu vaya. Or in this case, let me give you an example. Busco una camisa que sea azul, which means I'm looking for a shirt that is blue. We use the subjuntivo here because we're not looking for a specific one, okay? We're looking for any blue shirt that I haven't found yet, and I'm not sure if it exists, like any type of blue shirt, okay? We're implying uncertainty or non-specificity. Specificity. I can't pronounce that word. Specificity. Shit. What the fuck? You might be in the store and asking for help because you don't know which type of shirt you're looking for or if it's available. But if you say, busco una camisa que es azul, then you're looking for the blue shirt, for the blue shirt, for the shirt that is blue. When we use the indicative, say es instead of sea, then we indicate certainty, that I have a very particular shirt in mind. Or when you're at home, you're like, hey, busco una camisa que es azul, or busco la camisa que es azul. Maybe you would even say that. Busco la camisa que es azul. You say that to your girlfriend, to your mom, or to your brother, or whatever. I'm looking for that blue shirt. That's my blue shirt, the one I was wearing yesterday, whatever. I hope this gives you a rough idea of why this is difficult. There are certain verbs, there are certain conjunctions, like antes que, before you do this and that. It's a hustle. A lot to learn. A lot to memorize. Okay. Let's have a look at Brazilian Portuguese now. So in Brazilian Portuguese, we also have one present form, simple. Here we don't have the perfect form, the compuesto. So we have the perfeito and imperfeito, which are like the perfecto simple and imperfecto in Spanish. Like 99% of the cases they use the same way. Still a challenge for someone who's just learning the language. But if you were to learn Spanish or Portuguese and then the other one, you will have a way easier time because you already know how to use it. Then the future is the same for all three of them. Futuro simple, just like in the other two, you have conjugations you have to learn. You have a type of going to future in Portuguese as well, like in Spanish, like voy a comprar algo, I will buy something. Vou comprar algo. In Portuguese, same idea. And then the subjuntivo in Portuguese is a little different because it's a little more complicated than Spanish. The present one is almost used the same way as in Spanish, yes. The subjuntivo pretérito imperfeito is used more often. If you could choose an ability, blah, blah, blah. If you want to express something like this in English, in Portuguese you would say, se você, weird. Se você pudesse escolher uma habilidade. Pudesse here is in the subjuntivo pretérito imperfeito form. Use this for also uncertainty, impossible things, and also in if clauses for impossible conditions and all that type of stuff. That is important. And the subjuntivo futuro, okay? Like, when you come home, let me know. Quando você viver, me avise. Okay? Or, if he is tired, we won't go out. We don't know if he will be tired at night or later, you know? But if, then, this and that. So, se ele estiver cansado, ele não vai sair. So, if he is tired later, he will not go out. We also have in Brazilian Portuguese and Spanish the gerundio or gerundio, which is the I'm walking, the ing tense to express things that are happening now. Okay, I'm walking, I'm eating at this very moment. You got that in both languages, so same idea as in English. The conditional has one form less, or at least less used than in French. Makes it a little easier, but still you have to learn the conjugations. And the imperativo or imperativo, same idea as in French, again has to be learned. There's certain forms, okay? So as you see, Spanish and Brazilian Portuguese are a little closer to each other than French. And if we compare all these now, French is the most straightforward, like in English, at least the idea. You just have to learn a few forms more, and the subjunctive has to be learned and understood. Spanish, we have one more form to talk about the past, at least in mainland Spain. And we have the subjuntivo, which is a challenge. There's a lot to learn here, and it takes time. In Brazilian Portuguese, we have more or less the same tenses, but we have two more forms of the subjuntivo. Although the past form is also used in Spanish, but only for these impossible condition tenses or sentences. So for me, it felt easy. I always know when to use them. The pretérito imperfeito in Portuguese can be used for other tenses as well. Also, when you talk about certain uncertainties or when you tell a story, it has to be used in different forms as well. So it's heavily used in spoken language, is what I'm trying to say here. And the subjuntivo futuro, again, yet another form you have to learn, which is a hustle. So I would say Brazilian Portuguese is number one, the most difficult, because there's just so much to learn. So much to learn. Then Spanish, for sure, spot 2, and then French. Because French is the closest to English here, and I think that's the easiest one. Next up, irregular verbs. This one is going to be fast and easy, so I will just do all of them at once. As you can see, French sports 350 existing irregular verbs. Spanish has 250, and Brazilian Portuguese only 135. What is an irregular verb, you might ask me now? Okay. If we look at the word parler, hablar, or falar, in the respective languages, which all translate to speaking. These are all regular verbs. So in the present tense, in French, we just say je parle, tu parles, il parle, nous parlons, vous parlez, il parle. Okay? Regular means that the endings are the same. So if we looked at another er verb like manger, then it would also be je mange, tu manges, il mange, nous mangeons, vous mangez, il mange. Same in Spanish, okay? So the endings always the same. As you see, hablar, to use or to conjugate the verb, you take the word hablar, and then you delete the ending, the ar, and then you, for the respective forms, you just add an o, as, a, amos, ais, an. Okay, that's how you form it. So the regular endings, the form of an ar verb is just these endings. So, since we don't have conjugations in English, this might be completely new for you. And this is what you have to learn, okay? Because in English we just say I go, you go, he, she, it goes. There comes an S, and then we go, you go, they go. In Latin languages, you have to learn the conjugations. And in all three, and there are three types of verbs existing in Spanish, and they all differ in the ending. Okay, you have AR verbs, ER, and IR, or ER, yeah, IR, exactly. In French, it is ER, RE, IR. In Portuguese, ER, IR, AR as well. And the AR verbs have different endings as the ER, as the IR, okay? But generally, you take the main word, you just delete the ending, and then you add the endings respectively for the right tense, and that's how you conjugate. Irregular verb means that it doesn't matter if I have hablar or llevar, okay? We just have to delete the ending and then add the first or the second or the third to create the respective person. That's how you do it. So you only have to memorize the endings, and then you can create the conjugations. Okay. Irregular verbs, though, they are irregular because you can't just apply this rule. This is super annoying. Let me give you an example. The French word être, for to be, is irregular. Okay. The main form is être, but as you can see, when we conjugate, it becomes je suis, tu es, il est, nous sommes, vous êtes, ils sont. And there are 350 of them, and you have to memorize them specifically and individually. In Spanish, we have ser, which also is être, to be in some context. And this becomes yo soy, tú eres, él es, nosotros somos, vosotros sois, ellos son. In Portuguese, we also have ser. Here it becomes eu sou, ela, você é, nós somos, eles são. And if we look at them, it's a numbers game, okay? Brazilian Portuguese is the easiest in this regard because there's like less than half of the irregular verbs of French. So in that regard, French is the most difficult here, for sure. Annoying. Another thing you will see. In French and Spanish, we have 6 person, in the singular, we have the I, you, he, she, it, we, you, they. In Brazilian Portuguese, you don't use the second forms. You don't have the tu or the vosotros, which would be tu and vos in Portuguese. Mainland Portuguese, yes, but Brazilian Portuguese, you don't use it, okay? The you and the he, so the second and the third person is the same. So you say ele, ela, he, she speaks, ele, ela fala, but you speak is você fala. And also the third person plural, eles, elas, vocês falam. They, you guys, falam, okay? So you have to memorize 2 forms less, which make this even easier. So fucking cool. This is absolutely amazing. This is something I love about this language. And now comes a challenge though, because it can't be that easy. In French, we have one word to express being, to be. To be is just être. I am, you are, he, she, it is, we are, and so on and so forth. In Portuguese and Spanish, we have two verbs for that. Ser, estar, or se, está in Portuguese. They are used the same way, 99% of the cases, so that's easy if you want to learn both languages. But still, it is a challenge to decide when to use which one, especially if your native tongue is a Germanic language like German or English. To give you a quick overview, because yet again, I could make a whole video on the differences between ser y estar. Ser is generally used to describe essential characteristics or a permanent state, like ella es guapa, she is pretty, okay? Or él es inteligente, he's intelligent. That's something about your character trait that's permanent. That's not a state. Estar or está is used for temporary states, like ele está doente, which is Portuguese now, okay? He's sick. You're not sick forever. You're just sick for a limited period of time, hopefully. That's why you use está. Or use it for locations, like ele está em casa, he's at home. Okay, and ser is also used for identity, like yo soy alemán, I am German. That will never change. I mean, I could migrate to Spain or something, but generally those things don't change, so you would use that. Okay, this is just a very quick, brief overview, but it is a challenge and adds another extra layer of complexity to learning either Spanish or Portuguese. But still, I would say that French is the winner here, because even though you have to learn the difference between ser y estar, you can grasp the idea fast. Okay, it's something that I could teach you in an hour, and then you would only need a little practice, but it's something that is rule-based, okay? Something that you can understand and then feel fast enough when to use what. It's not as complex as to understand the difference between the perfecto and the imperfecto. I gotta say that's a bigger challenge for me. This one you can learn fast, okay? The more complex thing is the irregular verbs, because irregular means they're individual. So there's no rules, so you have to know every single one of them. So 350 is 100 more than Spanish, and 115 more to learn than in Portuguese. 215, holy shit, okay? Way more. That's why French is number 1, Spanish is number 2, and Portuguese is last. Why is that? Because in Portuguese we have 2 forms less to learn and even less regular verbs. So this one is very clear. Next up, genders and the plural. This will be a big challenge for English learners. Not so much for German learners. So why is that? In German we have 3 genders: masculine, feminine, and neutral. In the Latin languages we only have 2, masculine and feminine. In English, we don't have genders, everything is the and neutral. So this can be a pain in the ass. Let's look at French. French is a problem because we have unexpected plural forms. It's not so intuitive to create the plural sometimes, and the adjectives adapt to number and gender of the noun. Let's look at the word old, okay? In English, we say the old house, the old animal, the old animals, the old how's this? It's always old, it's always the. From the plural, we just put an S behind it. Intuitive and simple. In French, old has many forms, okay? In the singular, it's vieux for masculine, vieille for feminine. The plural, vieux for old, masculine, that's the same. Vieille, pronounced the same though, for feminine. And if the word after vieux begins with a vowel, then in the masculine form you have to say vieille. Like, what the fuck? Okay, so you say le vieux animal, the old animal, la vieille maison, the old house, les vieux animaux, and here the liaison again, so you say les vieux animaux. You see the plural of animal is not intuitive. You change the al to the o. Les vieilles maisons, the old houses, but le vieil hôtel. It's a pain. It is a pain. It is a pain. Another big pain in French. Oh, what's that? Another big pain in French is the possessive pronouns. You know, in English we say my house, your house, but it's always the same, you know. My kitchen, my kid, my dream. It's always my. In French, you'll have to decide if it is masculine, feminine, or plural, okay? So you say mon père, my dad, but it's ma, but you say ma maison, okay, my house. But if you have multiple houses, you say mes maisons, okay? So mon, ma, mes. Ton, ta, tes, son, censé, notre, which is masculine, feminine, the same. Votre, tu, ours, yours, leur, leur. So their houses, leur maison. This can be confusing. You will always have to know the gender of your noun, like père, maison, so on and so forth. So here's way more to memorize than in English. And then you have standalone pronouns, okay? Which is like mine. That house is mine. Mine. Or who's this? Whose is this? You say, oh, it's mine. Right? It's yours. But it's always mine. It's always yours. In French, you say le mien for the masculine, la mienne for the feminine, les miens if they're masculine and plural, and les miennes if they're feminine and plural. So you have 4 forms generally, as opposed to 1 in English. Way more to learn. This is, why is it always putting a W here? What the fuck? This is just annoying. Let's look at Spanish. Spanish too does have some unexpected plural forms, but not too many, okay? So light, luz, la luz becomes luces, or a young person, la joven, becomes las jóvenes. So generally, the plural is as easy as in English. So when you say casa, house, casas, okay? Generally, you just put an S in there. So that's easier than in French. When it comes to possessive pronouns, Spanish is amazing because it's almost like in French. You don't differ between masculine and feminine things when you say my house, my this and that. You say mi casa, okay? You say mi casa. Casa is feminine, but you also say mi mamá, my mom, mi mamá, or mi carro, okay? That's easy. And for the plural, you just put an S to it. Mis, tu, tus, so on and so forth. The standalone pronouns, like in French, you have 4. El mío, it's mine. When it's masculine, la mía, los míos, las mías. You get the idea. So the main difference here is that you have The plural of the nouns is a little easier. You don't have not too many of these crazy unexpected forms. And also the adjectives, they will also adapt in number and gender, yes, but also not as crazy as in French. Let's talk about the Brazilian Portuguese. Here we do have more unexpected plurals. So the word coração, heart, becomes corações, or leão becomes leões, pão becomes pães. You also have words that where you just have to put an S, like carro, carros, okay? And then possessive pronouns. This is maybe lies in between the two, because here you will have to differ between masculine and feminine. Meu carro, minha casa, meus carros, minhas casas, like in French. Although, as you can see, there's even one more form, because in French, the plural is always the same, that you don't differ between the genders. In Portuguese, you do. You will say meus carros or minhas casas. But you have two less, since, as you remember, we use two pronouns less in Brazilian Portuguese. But still, you will always have to know the gender and the number of the nouns you're talking about. So that makes it a little bit annoying. But big plus here is, you see, there's no standalone pronouns. So when someone asks you, hey, whose house is this? And you say, é a minha, okay? You say, oh, it's mine. So you have to learn a whole package of pronouns less. That's why I would say that French is the most complicated here, because when we compare it to Spanish, the standalone pronouns are completely the same amount of pronouns, but in the possessive pronouns, we have to decide if the noun is masculine or feminine, as opposed to just mi casa, mi carro in Spanish. That makes it a little easier. That's why Spanish is number 2. And in Portuguese, we don't have the standalones, so there's way less and 2 pronouns less, or 2 forms, the second form plural and second form singular doesn't exist, which makes Brazilian Portuguese the easiest little to remember here. All right, that's it. Let's talk about the result. French has 3, 6, 7, 10, 13. Oops. 13 points. Brazilian Portuguese has 2, 4, 7, 8, 9. Spanish, sports 1, 2, 4, 6, 8. Boys and girls, we have a result. I would say that French is the hardest language to learn amongst the Latin languages for English learners. In most cases, for most people. We have a winner. And as you see, leading. Spanish and Portuguese are more or less the same, and as you remember, sometimes I was not sure which one will be easier to learn, because these are closer to each other, as you might have learned by now, and French has a little more distance. For example, when we talked about the tenses, right? Here with the perfecto imperfecto thingy, Brazilian Portuguese and Spanish are closer. French is closer to English in this regard. Or the distinction with ser, estar, the same here. And French is like English with just être. Or when we talked about prepositions, French having only one pour, which means for, when Spanish and Portuguese have para and por. So these are closer to each other. But still, as you saw with the prepositions, with the contraction, Brazilian Portuguese has some things Spanish doesn't have, and we use two pronouns less, and we don't have standalone pronouns, so there's still differences. Yeah. So, if you wanted to learn one Latin language and you are not sure which one, and you would love to learn all of them, but need to decide which one to start first, then I'd say Spanish will be the easiest, because yet most of the things like genders, irregular verbs, tenses, prepositions are all matters of the grammar. And here, Spanish might be a little easier. A little. But the pronunciation. Here, Brazilian Portuguese is way more difficult than Spanish, for sure. And pronunciation is one big part of this all. One thing is to understand and to build sentences that are correct, but the other thing is to have fun speaking and being understood. And these are completely different skills. That's why I would say that for most Germanic language natives, learning Spanish will be easier and way more satisfying to produce nicely sounding sentences than Brazilian Portuguese or French. That's why it will probably be easiest to start with Spanish. Once you mastered ser, estar, and perfecto, imperfecto, all those things, then you can learn Portuguese. It will be so easy. It took me over a year to learn Spanish, but not consecutively. When I'm honest, I only studied actively when I lived in Spanish-speaking countries. When I went to other countries, I did other stuff, or only did a little bit of vocab stuff, So it took me, long to learn Spanish, but once I reached somewhat fluency of Spanish and started Brazilian Portuguese, oh my God, it's going so fast. Insane. If I could learn any language this fast, I could reach 12 languages till I'm 40. No joke. Yes, I hope this helps. If, let me say this again, you want to have an in-depth video on, let's say, the tenses, the differences, and the subjunctive, subjuntivo, how to use it and all that, or maybe the pronunciation, or maybe, I think the tenses could be a great extra video, because that is something I struggled with the most, and I can imagine most other people will struggle with as well. And the difference between ser, estar, or se, estar is also something a lot of people struggle with, especially, again, Germanic, so English or German natives. Okay, I hope you enjoyed. I did. I hope you learned something, and see you in the next video.